Demon AI. Demon AI.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we help you get a really thorough grasp of complex ideas and fast.
And today, we're wading into some pretty deep water.
We really are. We're looking at a paradox that honestly sits right at the intersection of justice, power, and morality.
The central question is a tough one. It's, if you have to fight an injustice, can you ever really win if you use the same tools, the same domination and violence that created it?
It's the ultimate ethical tightrope, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we're not just talking policy. We're digging into the spiritual and historical DNA of what victory even means, and asking if the means always corrupt the end.
And our guide for this is a series of excerpts from Jamin Bradley. His work gives this powerful theological critique of political power.
He's a really unique voice. I mean, he's a pastor, a musician, an author, a self-proclaimed nerd.
And an exorcist, which is fascinating in itself.
It is. And his essay, Machine Gun Preachers and Baby Babylons, is basically our roadmap for this whole discussion.
So we'll be exploring Bradley's key framework. He talks about this self-perpetuating problem he calls the domination cycle.
Right. And the seductive nature of what he calls Babylon's power, and how that stands in stark contrast to what he describes as the Jesus way of liberation.
And we'll see how this theological pattern plays out in, well, two very different arenas. An intense personal dilemma and a major geopolitical crisis.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's get into it. And let's start with a story that really forced Bradley to rethink everything he thought he knew about justice.
Right. The hook.
The Hook. He starts with the movie Machine Gun Preacher. You might have seen it. It stars Gerard Butler.
It's based on the true story of Sam Childers, a man who dedicates his life to rescuing children in Sudan from the absolute brutality of Joseph Kony.
He starts an orphanage, but to defend those kids, he has to operate, way outside the normal lines. He often has to go in, quote, guns blazing.
And it's such a compelling story. It's easy to connect with that impulse.
It really is. Bradley notes that it taps into this shared primal moral feeling. He says if you've ever been to a seminar on something like human trafficking, the question always comes up.
Why don't we just kick in their doors?
Exactly. Why don't we just go in there and rescue them already?
Yeah.
The film makes this really powerful case that sometimes aggressive, righteous force is the only moral option when you're facing pure evil.
And that impulse is so strong because the threat is real and immediate. You want to stop the bleeding.
But this is where the twist comes for Bradley. This is the aha moment. He says that after seeing the movie and really buying into its message, he then spent years just diving into Jesus' teachings.
Specifically, the Sermon on the Mount.
Exactly. And what he found there it completely flipped his perspective.
He realized the methods of the machine gun preacher, which are, driven by these noble intentions, were, and this is his phrase, so deeply incompatible with Jesus.
So how did that realization translate into, a practical change for him?
Well, it set him on a totally new path, a much more rigorous one. He became what he calls a Jesus-centric pacifist.
But he's quick to say this isn't about being passive, right? It's not just accepting evil.
Not at all. This is a very active stance. It's not focused on killing and destroying, but on building and creating abundant life.
So he calls this pacifistic aggression, which, that sounds like a total contradiction.
It does on the surface.
What does that look like?
He defines it as an aggression that targets the dynamics of oppression, not the people caught in it. So it's about, as he puts it, agitating the dynamics around us by partnering with the wisdom of God.
So less like fighting fire with fire.
And more like using truth and nonviolent disruption to just expose and, undermine the very foundations of the oppressor's power. It's a long game.
Right. Instead of a quick, violent win that leaves all this moral wreckage behind, this approach is about moral disruption, about truth-telling, and about what he calls self-giving love.
Exactly. The action itself has to embody the goal. So if your goal is justice and peace, your actions have to look like justice and peace.
And if they look like the aftermath of a gunfight and plant seeds of resentment,
then you've just kicked the can down the road. You've merely deferred the problem.
Okay, so that really sets the stage perfectly for his central theory. This big shift in his own thinking led him to identify this pattern he calls the domination cycle.
Yes.
Could you just lay out the mechanics of that for us?
Sure. The domination cycle is basically, it's humanity's default setting for power. The mechanism is really simple. When we try to get justice or security by using force, by using violence, by relying on our ability to kill and destroy.
It always cycles back to oppression.
Always. It's the core belief that might makes it right, even if you think your might is being used for good.
So what's the political result? When one power overthrows another, but uses those same methods of domination.
Bradley's argument is that the second you do that, you have, in his words, partnered with the enemy to install the enemy afresh. The foundation of the new government is identical to the old one. It's built on coercive force, on secrecy, on the threat of destruction.
So you don't actually get liberation. You get what he calls a baby Babylon.
Precisely. Because the foundation is still corrupt, the new regime is just, as he says, primed for baby Babylon to mature into an adult all over again.
And this is why so many revolutions, movements that start with the noblest intentions of freedom,
end up creating new systems of control that are just as brutal, sometimes even more so.
And what's really striking is how universal he sees this pattern. He draws a direct line from modern political theory all the way back to these ancient theological warnings.
A direct line. He connects it to John's Revelation, which describes this global system, Babylon, of economic and political and spiritual exploitation.
And he sees it in fiction, too.
He does. In Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and he deliberately showed that the only way to beat the evil ring of power
Was not to use it.
but to destroy it, because to wield it, even for a good cause, would just turn you into the next Dark Lord, the next Sauron.
The temptation to use the ring is the domination cycle itself.
It is. And that's the perfect contrast for what Bradley calls the Jesus way. True liberation comes through self-sacrifice.
By giving up the right to power and domination.
Right. The theological logic is actually pretty powerful. Babylon can only grow where its seeds are planted, and the enemy can't steal something from you that you give away freely. So if you refuse to use their tools, their system has no way to reproduce itself inside of you.
That is a powerful framework, but it brings up a really crucial practical question. How does this actually apply to current events? Especially when it feels like immediate action is the only choice.
That's the million-dollar question.
So let's apply this to his second case study, the sudden capture of Nicolás Maduro.
Right, and Bradley is very clear up front. He says Maduro's actions were criminal and the desire for justice and liberation in Venezuela is completely valid.
His critique isn't about the goal.
Not at all. It's aimed entirely at the foundation, the means that the American government used to make that capture happen. He argues the method was fundamentally Babylonian, regardless of the good outcome for some people.
But wait a minute. When you're dealing with a known oppressor, isn't force sometimes the only way to stop immediate atrocities? How does he square that circle?
And that's the immense difficulty, and he doesn't pretend to have easy policy answers, but he insists the theological pattern still holds. He points to 3 specific actions from the American administration that show they were relying on the domination cycle.
Okay, planting the seeds of future corruption.
Exactly.
So what were those seeds?
First, the U.S. government boasted of the great power of our military. The emphasis was on their own might as the deciding factor.
Which Bradley would see as a kind of idolatry of national power.
Precisely, relying on military strength instead of, say, international law or cooperative justice. Second, they explicitly violated the norms of international law to get it done.
And if justice requires adhering to the rules, then breaking them means your foundation is already cracked.
Right. It signals that the new order relies on force, not the rule of law. And the third point is all about control.
Let me guess. After the capture, the U.S. announced it would.
Now, take charge of Venezuela's future.
So it's about prioritizing national self-interest over Venezuelan self-determination. When the liberator immediately claims authority, the cycle has just been reset.
It's just a new boss, and that whole analysis created this huge division among Americans. You had people genuinely celebrating for the oppressed.
But also this real moral queasiness about the methods used by their own government.
And that tension is so important. Bradley observed that the administration was often pretty open about the fact that oil was a big part of this whole thing.
So if the primary driver is getting resources, the whole system is already compromised by greed.
Which is a key ingredient for Babylon's growth.
Okay, so this brings us to the last piece of the method he calls out. Using deception to frame the narrative and justify the force.
Yes. To get the public ready for an intervention, the U.S. had to, as the source puts it, test the waters literally.
And that refers to bombing what they claimed were Venezuelan drug boats.
Exactly. And that wasn't just a military move. It was a critical step in planting those Babylonian seeds of deception and narrative control.
Why is framing it around drugs so important for the domination cycle? What does that do?
Well, it totally changes the conversation. It's no longer about an internal Venezuelan crisis, which is a moral issue. It becomes about American self-protection, which justifies aggressive force.
So you turn Venezuelans into an enemy that we need protection from.
Right. You frame Americans as potential victims, not as partners trying to get justice for an oppressed people. It gives you the green light for unilateral intervention because now they're a direct threat to your interests.
So to synthesize Bradley's assessment,
Yeah.
even if you get a good immediate result, like overthrowing a tyrant,
If the whole movement is built on lies, deception, manipulation, and, primarily greed, then the entire thing is self-defeating in the long run.
that's the core of it. When Babylon is your tool, Babylon always has side effects.
Yeah.
The ripples of power, pride, and greed will be felt no matter what.
For Bradley, justice isn't just about the outcome. It's about the ethical cleanliness of the foundation.
Which leads right into his boldest claim, his definition of America itself as a Babylon. I mean, that's a loaded term.
It is.
Is he talking about moral depravity, or is it about geopolitical power?
He's very careful to say he's speaking theologically. He defines America in this context as a geopolitical structure that operates squarely within that domination cycle.
So any state that relies on military might, economic coercion, and self-interest
Is structurally a Babylon because, as he says, it can only ever reproduce itself. It's a critique of the system, not the people.
So we can't really expect the state to be the agent of pure Christ-like justice.
That's his point, exactly. He says we cannot expect any state operating in this cycle to follow the Jesus way. That job, he insists, will always belong to the Christians.
To those committed to a different way of doing things, the non-dominating way.
Right.
So this whole discussion, as he frames it, it's really theological, not political. The goal isn't a new foreign policy memo. It's to help you understand this fundamental cyclical pattern of domination.
That's the key takeaway. Justice has to be pursued with means that reject that cycle. Otherwise, the foundation is corrupt, no matter how good the immediate result feels.
And that leaves us with this really difficult dual imperative, doesn't it?
It really does. He says, may we celebrate with our liberatal friends, because we have to acknowledge that real relief from oppression. But then he immediately follows it up with this call to action.
But may we also recognize the wider theological and political picture at play here, so that we may be awake and sow good fruit.
You have to hold both. The joy for the oppressed and the deep moral accountability for the actions taken in their name.
So this brings us to our final and maybe most provocative thought for you to take away.
Bradley warns that how Americans behave in the coming days will fundamentally shape the nation. He says we have to work for full justice for Venezuela, and this is the hard part.
We must simultaneously repent of our varied sins in the midst of this.
And that repentance isn't just saying sorry. It's about actively acknowledging where self-interest and greed played a role in an action that was supposedly all about morality.
It demands a moral transformation, even in what looks like a moment of victory.
It's a huge challenge. Can you celebrate a win while also examining and changing the very foundations that made it possible?
A profound question to end on. Thank you for sharing these sources with us. This was a necessary and incredibly deep dive into how theology and geopolitics are so deeply connected.
My pleasure.
We look forward to the next deep dive.